What's going on, everybody? It's AG here. We've officially reached March, so you know what that means. It's time to talk some March Madness. So today I'm going to be revealing my first NCAA tournament bracket for this March. Now, I'm going to try to update these as conference tournaments move along, as teams get eliminated, as they move up or down seed lines, as we get some bid stealers, or they kind of open up more spots or take away spots. Going to give them bracket updates as we move along during that. So be on the lookout for those weekly, maybe even more often, depending on kind of what chaos happens. But on the left, you can see their overall seeds. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I've got them separated into each seed line. These first teams, until we get past the last four in, I have their best two wins and their worst two losses to kind of explain to you why teams are where they are. After that, I'll explain it when we get there. But starting off here, our one seeds. First off, number one, we got Auburn, 26-2. If they have this next to them, the conference they're in, SEC, that means right now I have them winning their conference tournament. So the closer we get to conference tournaments, I know the first one is starting up Sunday or Monday, I believe. So once we get to those, we'll know our bid thieves. We'll kind of be able to move some stuff around, but we're still pretty far away from that, at least a couple weeks. But Auburn, 26-2, number one overall seed. They've got wins over Houston and Bama. That's two of the one seeds. So how could you not move them down? Their losses are to Duke, another number one seed in Florida, which is, spoiler alert, on the 2 seed line. Auburn's got to be the number one seed right now. Duke coming in at number 2, 25-3, winners of the ACC, wins over Auburn, Arizona, then losses to Clemson and Kansas, which are both pretty high as well. Duke's looking pretty good right now. Number 3, Alabama, 23-5, wins over Houston and Kentucky, losses to Oregon and Purdue. All these teams are pretty good here. Houston, 24-4, wins over Iowa State, Texas Tech, losses to San Diego State and Texas Tech. So out of those, I mean, Houston probably has the worst loss with the San Diego State loss, but Alabama kind of right there with Purdue. They're probably right on kind of par with that. But Auburn and Duke, in my opinion, right now are definitely in the top 2. I know some people have had Alabama instead of Duke at number 2. All right, let's moving on to the 2 seeds here. We have, starting off, Florida, 24-4, wins over Auburn, Tennessee, losses to Georgia and Missouri. They've looked pretty good here. Having a win over number 1 seed definitely helps your case. They could, if anybody's going to make a case to jump up to the 1 seed line, it's going to be Florida. Tennessee, 23-5, wins over Florida. Missouri lost to Kentucky and Vanderbilt. Tennessee's done some good things, split games with Florida. So both of those teams are kind of fighting for that top 2 spot right now. I've got Kentucky here. I know that's probably a pretty high for a lot of people. They're coming in at 19-9. They've got a lot of losses, but the reason I've got them here is just their wins. They've got wins over 3 of the top 6 teams, Duke, Florida, and Tennessee. I think I have to put them here. Now, they've got some questionable losses, but really after Florida and Tennessee, there's a pretty big drop-off. Like Michigan State has a good record, but they have bad losses as well. So I've got Kentucky here. I would probably put even another team, another SEC team at number 8, but I don't know if they're going to quite go that SEC bias. I think they'll maneuver it around a little bit so they don't have that. But if you were to ask me who is the 8th best team, I'd probably put another SEC school here. But I've got Michigan State as the other 2 seed, 23-5, pretty good record. I've got them as winners of the Big Ten right now. Big Ten has a lot of okay teams this year, but not just anybody super good that I think might realistically win a championship. But as right now, Michigan State leading the pack. All right, let's move on to 3 seeds. First off, Missouri. So that is the team I probably have at the 2 seed right now. If I kind of got the inclination that they would move an SEC school in there again. But Missouri, 21-7, wins over Florida and Bama, 2 teams that we've already talked about. And then we've got Clemson at 23-5. They have wins over Duke and Kentucky. So anybody that has a win over a 1 seed is going to get some recognition. And Clemson, a lot of people haven't had them this high from what I've seen, but I think Clemson, with their record, with their wins, I think they're going to be up here. Then we've got a pair of Big 12 teams, to round out the 3s. Iowa State at 21-7 and Texas Tech at 21-7. Both have some quality wins. Iowa State over Tech, over Marquette, Kansas, teams we'll talk about later. And then Tech, you've got a win over Houston, which is a 1 seed, obviously. All right, 4 seed wise, we've got Wisconsin, another Big Ten team that I've seen ranked pretty high, but I'm not quite as high on them just because their wins aren't way up here like some of the other teams, Wins over Purdue and Arizona, 22-6. Then we've got Texas A&M at 20-8. SEC making a strong push to really just fill up these top 4 seed lines with a ton of teams. One's over Missouri, which we talked about, Tech, which we talked about. We got Arizona at 19-9, wins over 2 3 seeds, Iowa State and Texas Tech, and then St. John's out of the Big East. Really good record, 25-4, but the Big East isn't as strong as sometimes it is. Like even Creighton, Marquette, and UConn aren't as high as they've sometimes been, all fighting for top 5 seeds or nothing. It's not like that this year. All right, let's move on to the 5 seeds. We've got Kansas out of the Big 12. Kansas is kind of questionable because they started off the year really strong, but they've kind of been coming back down to earth lately these past couple months. But they've got a win over Duke and Iowa State, so I'm going to give them credit here and bump them up despite a lot of losses. Oregon 20-8, they have a win over Alabama and Wisconsin. Purdue 19-9, so a lot of teams having a lot of losses, pushing those 10 double-digit losses. But Purdue with wins over Alabama and Michigan. Again, if you have a win over a 1 seed, you're going to be up pretty hot. Michigan, excuse me, Michigan has a pretty good record, but they don't really have those top tier wins. Michigan, I'm a little questionable on. They have the FAU coach, so they've got a coach that's been there now. But as far as their upside, they win a lot of close games, so I feel like that's probably going to come back to get them at some point. But as right now, though, it really hasn't affected their record. All right, excuse me. Moving on to the 6 seeds, Memphis, 23-5. I'll get my face out of the way. Hold up. 23-5. Wins over Missouri, Clemson, Michigan State, all 3 pretty good wins, but they don't have the best losses. Wichita State and Temple, 2 teams in the AAC, nowhere near the bubble or anything. So they have the good wins, but they also have the bad losses, but that's going to be the case for a lot of people. So Memphis, kind of a question mark for me on where they'll be ranked. They could be ranked lower, closer to like the 8 seed line. They also could be ranked higher. I'd say anywhere from 4 seed down. Marquette, 21-7. Wins over Wisconsin and Purdue. Again, I'm not super high on the Big Ten this year, so those wins, as good as they are, I don't really know how good they are in the grand scheme of things, but that's their highest ranked wins probably. Losses, not really bad losses. Dayton and Villanova both kind of on the bubble. So Marquette, they could be ranked higher as well. Not bad losses at all. Ole Miss wins over Louisville and Alabama. One of the few teams to beat the number 1 seed, although Alabama, every team we've talked about here that has beaten them is ranked pretty high because Alabama doesn't have a lot of losses. So that kind of shows you where Alabama's at. Ole Miss, though, loss-wise, not really bad losses either. Purdue and Vanderbilt, probably going to be a tournament team. They're kind of trending that way. And then Purdue definitely in. UCLA 20-8, wins over Oregon and Michigan State. Their losses a little more questionable. Rutgers and Minnesota, nowhere near the field. All right, moving on to the 7 seed line. We've got Maryland, 21-7. I've seen Maryland ranked a little higher in some places, but I wasn't a huge fan of their resume. Wisconsin, UCLA, both good teams, but not great teams. And then Northwestern and Washington, once again, teams not near the bubble. Creighton, 20-8, wins over St. John's and Kansas. So that's 2 top 5 seed teams for you. So pretty good there for Creighton. And Nebraska is on the bubble. BYU, 20-8, wins over Kansas and Arizona. BYU, kind of a question mark as well. They could be a little lower. I wouldn't be shocked if they're closer to the bubble than not, depending on what happens with the bubble, because the bubble is kind of tight this year. There's some pretty good teams that are kind of pushing that, last 4 buys type of area. All right, Louisville 22-6, wins over Clemson and West Virginia. Clemson, a good win, but other than that, they really haven't had that many good wins because West Virginia is right on the bubble. So if that's your second best win, I don't know how high they're going to necessarily rank you. All right, 8 seed line, we've got St. Mary's 26-4. Really good season from St. Mary's. They've got wins over Gonzaga, multiple of them. And then they've got a win over Nebraska, which is kind of on that bubble line, but they haven't really beaten anybody super upside because Gonzaga even this year hasn't lived up to their usual hype. So it's not like Gonzaga is a great win like it normally would be. Then we've got Mississippi State at 19-9, wins over Memphis and Ole Miss, 2 really good wins, and Texas A&M. So Mississippi State firmly in the field. Vanderbilt, I think they're firmly in the field too. They're kind of slowly inching up the seed line. The more they win here, the more they kind of stretch out that, get closer to 20 wins than 10 losses. But wins over Tennessee and Kentucky, 2 really good wins. Their losses to 2 tournament teams, Mississippi State and Drake. So Vanderbilt, I think they're in. UConn, 19-9, wins over Marquette and Creighton. 2 losses to probably 2 teams out of the field. So UConn, I think they're in, but the more the bubble shrinks, the more they're going to kind of inch towards that bubble line. unless they somehow win the Big East tournament. All right, so looking at the 9 seeds now, we've got Illinois 18-11, wins over Wisconsin and UCLA, 2 good wins. New Mexico 22-6 out of the Mountain West, wins over UCLA, which we already talked about, and then Utah State right below them, another team in the Mountain West. Both pretty good records here, pushing kind of 25-5-ish records. But Utah State, some solid wins. Win over St. Mary's, which we just talked about, so that's a good win. And then San Diego State, another team in their conference that's kind of right on the bubble. West Virginia 17-11. They're another one that could be closer to the bubble, depending on who you talk about. They're kind of right above it right now for me as far as first 4 in type of teams, but depending on what else goes wrong around them, they could kind of move up or down. But they do have some solid wins here: Iowa State, Arizona, and Kansas. Sorry, guys, a lot of talking. Let's see. 10 Cs, we got San Diego State 19-7. So they do have a win over Houston. I think that's going to benefit them because they might be overranked because of that. But other than that, their resume is not super great, despite the wins over Houston and Creighton. Lost to UNLV and Colorado State. Both teams probably out of the field. So they've lost some games they probably shouldn't have lost to, but those wins, especially with that win over Houston, they're probably going to get bumped up a little bit because of their record. Gonzaga coming in at 10 seed as well, 22-8. They have wins over Baylor and San Diego State. The reason I have them below San Diego State is just because they have worse losses. Oregon State and Santa Clara are nowhere near the field, while Colorado State is at least kind of on the bubble. Arkansas 17-11. I think Arkansas is firmly in right now. Depending on, what goes down around them. Like I've said, with a lot of these bubble teams, they could shrink into a play-in team. Right now, I think they're firmly out of it because of their wins over Michigan and Kentucky, and they don't have the worst losses. If Oklahoma is on one of your worst losses, you're probably doing something right because Oklahoma at least has a good record. And then Baylor at 16-12, wins over St. John's and Kansas, 2 losses to teams that are not going to sniff the field probably in Colorado and TCU. All right, so moving on to our 11 seed lines. Now, if the team is italicized, that means they're one of the last 4 in. Okay, so I'll talk about them here in a minute. But the first 2, these are not teams in the last 4 in, so they won't be in the play-in. Drake, right now I've got them winning the Missouri Valley, so they could be a 10 seed. They probably will be. Got a good record, just don't have the upside on wins. Vanderbilt's their best win, and then Kansas State. So they really haven't played too many teams that are great. So that's why I've got them 11 seed, but they're in. I think now if they somehow lose, let's say they lose to Bradley in their tournament or something, that would be where you would almost have another bubble shrink a little bit because Drake would probably take one of those bubble spots from one of these teams. Georgia, I think they're in right now as well. So I've got them in my last 4 buys. Wins over St. John's, Florida at 17-11. I think a win over St. John's in Florida gets you in, as well as a win over Kentucky. And then your 2 losses, Arkansas and Ole Miss. Georgia has almost no losses that are to bad teams because when those are technically your 2 worst losses, probably they're both in the field. I think Georgia's in. All right, so these are my last 4 in right here. They're kind of italicized, kind of hard to tell, but this is the order. So Indiana 17-11. I've got them as one of my last 4 in. Nebraska 17-11, another team out of the Big Ten. I've got them as one of my last 4 in. And then Boise State coming in at 28. 20-8. They have 2 wins over 2 teams in the field. I think that's going to help them out there and not really losing to a ton of teams with only 8 losses. And then Oklahoma, I think that win over Michigan and Louisville is going to help them. I know they've struggled in SEC play, but lucky for them, they did good before they got into SEC play, and those teams have done good as well. So I think Oklahoma will sneak in. Now, we'll see what happens. Like I said, I'll update this over the weeks as we have get into tournament play and stuff like that to where teams get dipped. Like if Drake loses, like I said, that might shrink the bubble a little bit because they're probably going to take one of those spots, so somebody's going to be out. All right, so moving on to these teams right here. All right, so everybody below this is an automatic qualifier from their conference. So I've kind of changed it as far as what I'm talking about as far as wins and losses to these teams. So instead of doing their 2 worst losses, I've got just their best loss, okay? So I'm going to give you their best wins and then kind of their best loss as well. So the 12 seeds, all these have pretty good records. I'm pretty confident these are your 12 seeds most likely. I don't see it probably being any other 4 teams. But UC San Diego, good record, 25-4, wins over Utah State. We talked about them. All right, so that's a pretty good win there. And then a loss to San Diego State. So not just a ton of losses. VCU, 23-5. Solid wins, Colorado State, George Mason. Now, Seton Hall and St. Bonaventure, pretty bad losses, but again, that's probably their best losses. Liberty, 23-5 on the season, really good year. win over McNeese State right here below them, and then Kansas State. And then they've got a loss to FAU at the beginning of the year. McNeese State went over North Texas, a team kind of on the bubble, and then a loss to Liberty and Alabama. So all four of these teams, I think, have a good shot at winning their first round matchup. 13s. All right, so some of these, probably these top three teams could climb up to a 12 seed depending on what goes down. But Yale coming out of the Ivy League, went over Akron, and they've got a loss to Purdue. High Point, 26-5, really good record on the season out of the Big South. Wins over UAB and North Texas, two teams on the bubble. And then losses to UNC Asheville and UNT Greensboro. Akron, 22-6, solid wins over Miami of Ohio and Kent State, and then losses to St. Mary's and Yale. So those are two teams that are probably in. Now, these are the teams that are kind of questionable as far as if they lost. Not Lipscomb. Lipscomb at 22-9. I'm not talking about them, but these other three, if they were to somehow lose in their tournament, that might shrink the bubble a little bit. They might get still a bid. All right, let's moving on to the 14 seed line now. All right, first off, Utah Valley, 20-7 out of the WAC. They are winning Grand Canyon's conference tournament. You may remember Grand Canyon going on a run last year. And they've got some solid losses, Stanford, Sanford, and James Madison. Norfolk State, 20-8. They've got a win over James Madison, and then losses, pretty good losses. Tennessee, Baylor, Grand Canyon, Stanford. Grand Canyon, Stanford, both on the bubble. So not bad losses. Chattanooga, 22-8, win over Sanford, lost to St. Mary's in Indiana, and then Montana coming out of the Big Sky at 21-8. I move on to the 15 seed line. We got James Madison, 20-10 out of the Sun Belt. Towson out of the Colonial. Central Connecticut, really good record, but they haven't really played anybody. 22-6 out of the Northeast. And then Robert Morris, same situation, 23-8 out of the Horizon. Then the 16 seeds, we've got Southern at 18-9, Bryant at 18-11, Marist at 20-5, really good record, but they hadn't played anybody. Southeast Missouri State, 20-10, then American out of the Patriot, and Omaha out of the Summit. So these last four here, Bryant and Southern would be exempt from the first four in, but Omaha, American, Southeast Missouri, and Maurice would all play in the play-in game. And then, all right, so moving on to the bubble picture here. We've got my last four buys, Gonzaga, Arkansas, Baylor, Georgia, to give you a little breakdown on what it looks like. Last four in right now, I've got Indiana, Nebraska, Boise State, and Oklahoma. So those would be the play-in teams for that 11 seed. First four out right now, Ohio State, Texas, San Francisco, and Cincinnati. Then next four out, Villanova, Dayton, Colorado State, and Xavier. So an updated bubble watch picture. I'll try to do an update on the bubble picture a little more often than I will this, because I can obviously put out a video on that a little easier than I can on the full bracket breakdown. But updated bubble watch, I've got about 30 teams still in play for a bubble spot. North Texas, 21-6. They've got wins over UAB, Oregon State, then some bad losses. UAB 19-9, win over North Texas, so they split. Then a win over Tulane, bad losses as well. I don't think either one of these gets in unless they win the American Conference Tournament. George Mason, good season, 22-6, wins over Loyola Chicago. That's a well-known name. And then Dayton as well. Dayton had a pretty good year. Their two losses, though, not very good. Dayton 19-9, so they have the quality wins here over UConn and Marquette, but their losses kind of slacking. SMU, really good record, 21-7 in the ACC, but they don't have a win over a tournament team. So I think that's going to come back to get them. Wake Forest, they've got a win over Michigan, but nobody else in the tournament. And then North Carolina, they've got a win over UCLA, nobody else in the tournament. So both these three teams, I think they're going to need some help. They're going to have to go on a run this last week of the season and then go on a run in the conference tournament to kind of help them out a little bit. Big 12, West Virginia, 17-11. Right now they're in, as well as Baylor. They're both in right now, but still that could change. Cincinnati, 17-11. They've got a shot here. Out of these three teams, Cincinnati has the best shot, I think, just because they could boost their record a lot. If they can get to 20-12, they might be in. TCU, UCF, I don't think either one of them getting in because they're so close to 500. Big East wise, you got Xavier at 18-10. I don't think they're in just because their losses are bad. Georgetown and TCU, two teams that aren't going to be in the tournament. Villanova 17-12. They've got good wins as well in the Big East, but again, their losses kind of iffy. Then Georgetown, same thing. You got one over Creighton, but they don't have wins over UConn or St. John, so I think Georgetown's firmly out. Big Ten wise, I've got Nebraska and Indiana in right now. Ohio State needs some help to get in. Their record is just a little too close to 500. I think that's going to hurt them a little bit. Missouri Valley, Bradley If they can somehow beat Drake again, they might have an argument to get in because they do have a win over San Francisco as well, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Bradley, though, I think needs to win the Missouri Valley Conference tournament to help them out. If they win the Missouri Valley, I think 2 teams get in because I think Ilma and Drake would get in. Mountain West, Colorado State and Boise State, both good records. Wins over for Colorado State, wins over San Diego State and Boise, but losses to teams not in the tournament. Same thing for Boise. Boise, I have in right now just because of their wins. Clemson, St. Mary's, New Mexico, 3 tournament teams. So if you got those wins as well as only 8 losses, I think they're in. SEC, that's where it's going to get kind of iffy because I don't know if they're going to put multiple teams from the SEC in the first 4 in, or last 4 in, that little first 4 playing game. Arkansas and Georgia, I think, are comfortably in right now, depending on what happens with the bubble. Oklahoma and Texas, though, they need help. All right, they've got good wins, but they have bad losses as well. Oklahoma not near as bad of losses. LSU is not as bad as South Carolina, but Texas having that loss to Ohio State, that could hurt them a little bit. Because that's a team that you're going to be fighting for with that spot. So that could come back to get them. Out of the West Coast, San Francisco, 23-7. Wins over St. Mary's, Boise State, Loyola. They could sneak in, but they're going to need some help. They need to go on a run in their conference tournament. And then last but not least here, Western Athletic Conference, Grand Canyon, 21-6. Made a good run last year, so they've at least got the name recognition going for them. But they, as far as their wins this year, kind of iffy. Stanford kind of on the bubble. Utah Valley is currently winning their conference, but they haven't done a lot to help themselves out as far as losing to other teams that aren't very good. So as of right now, that is my current bracket update, kind of what my first 4 outs looking like, first 4 ins looking like, and then kind of what the rest of the seed lines are looking like. But let me know, as of right now, who do you think is the last 4 in? What changes would you make to this? Let me know. Be on the lookout for more. I'll put out more next week, possibly this weekend, depending on what goes down, but we'll see. Comment down below. Make sure to like this video and subscribe.